The salt stings my eyes, not from the wind, but something colder. It feels wrong being here. On this beach. The air is thick with the scent of brine and something else, the faint, metallic tang of betrayal. He gestures down the shoreline, a casual flick of his wrist, pointing to a house perched on the dunes, bleached wood and glass glinting under the indifferent sun. It's smaller than ours, simpler, almost charming if you didn't know. If you didn't know what it represented. He's talking, words about investment, opportunity, diversifying the portfolio. His voice is a low hum against the roar of the waves, a sound I've learned to tune out, or perhaps, to hear too clearly. I just nod, my smile a carefully constructed facade, brittle as the dry sand under my feet. My gaze locks onto the house, and a chill, deeper than any ocean current, washes over me. This isn't just a house. It's a monument to his lie, a secret world built brick by stolen brick, right here where the sea meets the land.
And he thinks I don't know. He thinks I'm blind.
This feeling, this cold, hollow ache that settles deep in your chest and solidifies into something hard and sharp. If you've ever felt that chilling certainty of being fundamentally lied to, tell me in the comments. Let me know where you are and what time it is when you're hearing this. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps me more than you know to keep sharing these stories. Thank you. He kept files. Not neatly organized in the study, but stuffed into a locked drawer in his other desk. The one at the office that I never went to. My mistake. One of many, it turns out. I found them after he left for that conference in Miami. A sudden trip. Urgent, he said. Always urgent when it involved her. I wasn't looking for secrets. I was looking for a pen. The drawer was stiff. I jiggled it, and it sprang open, spilling papers onto the floor. Bank statements I'd never seen. Emails with names I didn't recognize but tones I did. And a deed. A deed for a property. A beach house. In her name. The name I'd pieced together from hushed phone calls and credit card statements for florists I never received flowers from. The world tilted. Not dramatically, no sudden crash of thunder or shattering glass. It was a slow, sickening lurch, like being on a boat in rough seas when you didn't know a storm was coming. Everything I thought was solid, the foundation of 15 years, dissolved into a watery mess. He bought her a house. Not a weekend trip, not a fancy dinner. A house. A piece of permanence. A future he was building with someone else, using the life we built together as collateral. The early days were a blur of nausea and disbelief. I'd walk through our perfectly appointed home, the home we chose, the home we decorated, the home where we'd planned a future, and see a stranger. His things were everywhere, familiar and suddenly alien. His coffee cup by the sink, the newspaper folded just so, his side of the bed, a landscape of comfortable lies. I felt like an archaeologist in the ruins of my own life, uncovering artifacts of a civilization I thought was real, only to find it was a carefully constructed illusion. The first impulse was to scream, to tear it all down, to confront him, wave the papers in his face, demand answers, unleash the storm that raged inside me. But something stopped me. A cold, clear voice in the back of my mind that sounded suspiciously like my grandmother, who'd survived worse than infidelity, with quiet dignity. "Don't make a scene," she'd always say. "Make a plan." So I made a plan. The anger was a fire, yes, but I channeled it. Not into a destructive blaze, but into a steady, burning focus. I hired someone. Quietly. Discreetly. Not a flashy private investigator, but a woman with eyes everywhere and a reputation for uncovering inconvenient truths. She confirmed the affair. Confirmed the house. Confirmed the timeline. He'd been planning this for months. Maybe years. While he kissed me goodbye in the morning, while he sat across from me at dinner, he was building a sanctuary for his other life. The pain was a constant companion. A dull throb during the day, a sharp stab in the lonely hours of the night. I ate less, slept less. My reflection in the mirror was a pale imitation of myself, eyes haunted, smile forced. I felt like I was wearing a mask, living a double life parallel to his. Playing the part of the oblivious wife while inside, A strategist was being born, armed with spreadsheets and legal pads instead of swords. I started asking questions. Casual questions. About his work, his investments, the market. I watched his eyes. They were practiced at deception, but under the surface, a flicker of impatience, a subtle shift in posture. He was so confident in my naivety. That confidence was his greatest weakness. And my greatest weapon. The house. I researched it. Not just the sale price, but the location, the history, the zoning laws. It was part of a new development, built on what used to be untouched coastline. Prime property, they called it. An investment, he'd said. For their future. The thought clawed at me. How dare he use our life, our resources, our years together, to fund a future with someone else? The injustice of it was a physical weight. I started digging deeper into my own finances. Our shared accounts, yes, but also my personal assets. Things I'd inherited, investments I'd made before we met, properties that had been in my family for generations. He knew about some of it in broad terms. But like him, I had my own quiet corners, my own separate ledgers. He'd never paid much attention to my business affairs. Another mistake. The deeper I dug, the more I realized the complexity of his deception. Shell companies, offshore accounts, layers of obfuscation designed to hide assets, presumably for the eventual divorce he likely planned to initiate on his terms, leaving me with less than I deserved. The anger hardened into a cold resolve. This wasn't just about a beach house and an affair anymore. This was about dismantling a betrayal built on a foundation of calculated lies. The rising challenges felt insurmountable at times. Keeping the facade up was exhausting. Sharing a bed, a meal, a conversation, knowing the depth of his deceit felt like performing a grueling play with no intermission. There were moments I wanted to break, to shatter the carefully constructed calm and unleash the fury. But I held back. Patience, my grandmother's voice echoed. I met with lawyers. Not just one, but several. Corporate law, property law, forensic accounting. I didn't tell them everything at first. I tested the waters, asking hypothetical questions, gauging their expertise and discretion. I needed people who understood complex financial structures, people who could see through the maze he'd built. The legal jargon, the endless documents, the sheer volume of information was overwhelming. I spent nights poring over spreadsheets, cross-referencing dates, names, transactions. My life became a double helix of deception, his outward lie, my inward secret investigation. He grew bolder. Phone calls he didn't try to hide as much. Late nights that weren't for work. He seemed almost proud, like he'd gotten away with something magnificent. His arrogance was a bitter pill, but I swallowed it. Each instance fueled my determination. Each lie he told solidified my resolve. The beach house wasn't just a symbol of his betrayal, it became the focal point of my strategy. He poured money into it. Renovations, landscaping, furniture, building their nest. Every dollar he spent felt like a personal insult, a tangible measure of how little he valued our shared history. I tracked every expense, every delivery, every contractor. I knew that house better than he did, perhaps better than she did. There was a particularly bad night. He was late, smelled of cheap perfume and desperation. He spun a tale about a client dinner that ran over. I listened, nodded, even managed a tired smile. After he fell asleep, snoring softly, I went to the study, not his desk, but mine. I pulled out the files. The bank statements showing transfers to the Mistress's account labeled consulting fees. The emails arranging secret weekends. The deed to the beach house. I held them in my hand, the paper cold and unforgiving. And for the first time, the cold resolve wavered. Was it worth it? This pain, this secrecy, this elaborate plan? Was revenge truly sweeter than just walking away? That night, the deepening crisis felt absolute. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the potential emptiness of victory. What would be left after the dust settled? A pile of paper, a seized house, and a broken life? Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed in weeks finally came, silent and hot against my skin. I sat there until dawn, the papers scattered around me like fallen leaves from a poison tree. But as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and cold gray, something shifted. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my narrative, about demonstrating that I was not a fool, not a victim to be discarded. It was about power. His power had come from deceit and control. Mine would come from knowledge and ownership. I looked at the deed again. The legal description of the property. It was a single lot within a larger area. An area he described as undeveloped when he talked vaguely about the investment. He saw a single house. I started to see the land around it. My family had been involved in real estate for generations. Land was in my blood, in my history. My grandfather used to say, they can build on the land, but they can't make more of it. The person who holds the ground holds the power. I'd always thought it was just an old saying. Now it felt like a prophecy. I expanded my research. Beyond the single lot, beyond the development. I looked at the entire coastline surrounding that area. Property records, historical maps, land ownership databases. It was complex, fragmented. Parcels owned by different people, different trusts, different companies. But a pattern began to emerge. It required more resources, more discretion. I brought in the best legal team I could find, specialists in complex land acquisitions and corporate structures. They were expensive, relentless, and utterly discreet. I instructed them to begin acquiring properties. Not the house itself, not yet. The land around it, the beachfront leading up to it, the access roads, the empty lots adjacent to the development. It wasn't easy. Some owners didn't want to sell. It took time, negotiation, sometimes multiple offers. I used shell corporations, layers of anonymity, just like he had. It felt strangely satisfying, using his own tactics against him. I saw the land through different eyes now. Not just sand and water, but boundaries, deeds, rights, power. He was so preoccupied with his new life, his new house, his mistress, that he didn't notice the quiet activity happening just beyond his carefully constructed bubble. He saw the finished development, the paved roads, the houses rising on the dunes. He didn't see the subtle shifts in ownership of the land bordering it, the quiet accumulation of deeds and names he didn't know, linked back to entities he couldn't trace. The midpoint shift wasn't a sudden realization, but a slow dawning. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was strategically positioning myself. He wanted a piece of the coast?
Fine.
I would simply acquire the entire board. His single move, buying one square, would become irrelevant when I owned the entire game. The planning became my obsession. Every detail, every potential obstacle. What if he tried to expand? What if she tried to sell? My team anticipated every move. They worked tirelessly, navigating complex legal waters, securing options, buying up parcels small and large. The cost was significant, draining my personal reserves, pushing me to the brink financially. But failure was not an option. The deepening crisis wasn't just about his betrayal anymore. It was about the immense risk I was taking. If my plan failed, if he discovered what I was doing before it was complete, I could lose everything. Not just him, but my financial security, my reputation, the legacy of my family's land. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on my chest. There were days I felt like I was drowning, pulled under by the currents of secrecy and impending confrontation. He noticed my distraction, my fatigue. He attributed it to the stress of modern life. He even suggested I take a vacation, perhaps a cruise. Alone, of course, for my well-being. The sheer audacity of his suggestion, offering me solitude while he built a life with someone else, was almost comical. Almost. The turning point arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet thud of final documents being signed. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. The crucial parcels of land bordering the development, including the narrow strip that provided the only legal access to his house from the main road, were mine. Not in my name, of course. Hidden behind layers of corporate veils. But mine nonetheless. I own the gateway. I owned the beach up to his property line. I owned the view to either side. He owned a single house, surrounded on 3 sides by land I controlled, and on the 4th by the ocean. The legal team called it strategic acquisition. I called it building a cage. A golden cage, perhaps with ocean views, but a cage nonetheless. Now it was time. Time to reveal the trap. I didn't want a shouting match. I didn't want tears. I wanted silence. I wanted him to understand, with crystalline clarity, the depth of his miscalculation. I arranged a meeting. Not at home, not at his office. At the offices of my legal team. A neutral, sterile environment. I invited him, and I invited her. Anonymously at first, through separate, official-sounding letters from a law firm specializing in property disputes. He was curious. She was nervous. They arrived separately, but almost at the same time. He looked confident, slightly annoyed. She looked pale. They sat across the large conference table from my lead attorney and me. My attorney did the talking at first, his voice calm, professional. He laid out the details of the recently concluded land acquisitions. Parcels, deeds, ownership structures. He spoke in dry, legal terms, pointing to maps projected onto a screen. The maps showed the development where his house sat, a small rectangle, and then the vast surrounding area, shaded in a different color, indicating a single, new owner. Confusion flickered across his face. He shifted in his seat. "What is this?" he interrupted, his voice sharper than before. "This land? What does this have to do with anything?" My attorney paused, looked at me. I met his gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was my turn. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished table. My voice was low, steady. No emotion, just facts. "It has everything to do with it, Tom," I said, using his first name, a rarity in our strained interactions of late. "You bought Lot 14 in the Sea Breeze Dunes development." I paused, letting the name of her house hang in the air. Her eyes widened slightly. He bristled. "Yes, I made an investment," he said, puffing his chest out. "A sound one. It's none of your concern." I smiled then. A small, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Actually, it is. You see, while you were busy building your little love nest on Lot 14, I was busy acquiring everything else." I gestured to the map. "This shaded area, Tom? All of it. The beachfront. The land behind you. The access road you use to get to the highway." His eyes darted from the map to my face, then to the attorney, then to her. She looked utterly bewildered, scared. What are you talking about?" he stammered. "That land it's nobody's business." "It's my business now," I stated flatly. "Through a series of transactions over the past year, I now own the majority of the undeveloped coastline surrounding your development, including the land that provides the only legal access to your property." The color drained from his face. He understood. He wasn't just caught. He was trapped. You can't do that," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Oh, I can," I replied, the dry humor finally making an appearance. "Turns out a little bit of foresight and a lot of inherited land can be quite powerful." I looked directly at her then. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. "Enjoying the view from the house, Sarah?" I used her name, the name he'd tried so hard to keep secret. It hung between us like a curse. "It's quite lovely, isn't it? Miles and miles of coastline." I swept my hand across the map. "All mine."
His jaw dropped.
He looked like a fish out of water, gulping for air. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by naked shock and dawning horror. He had made his move, thought he was checkmating me, and instead, he'd walked directly into a trap he hadn't even seen being built. He'd been focused on one small piece of sand, while I had acquired the entire beach. You knew?" He choked out, looking at me, really seeing me, for the first time in years. "I knew," I confirmed. "Almost from the beginning. Why didn't you say anything? And ruin the surprise?" I countered, the edge in my voice sharp as glass. "Besides, I was busy. You gave her a house. I decided to buy the neighborhood." He buried his face in his hands. She started to cry, quiet, desperate sobs. The scene was intensely dramatic, yes, the climax of months of pain and planning. But for me, it felt strangely quiet. The storm inside had passed, leaving behind a vast, empty calm. My attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Smith," he said, addressing my husband in a tone that brooked no argument. "Your property now effectively exists in a legal cul-de-sac. The sole access road is privately owned. Any infrastructure crossing our land is subject to renegotiation." He paused, letting it sink in. "We are prepared to discuss granting you an easement for access. However, the terms will be significant." He didn't need to elaborate. The power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. He held a deed to a house. I held the deeds to everything surrounding it. His investment was now, at best, a complicated liability, entirely at my mercy. The aftermath wasn't a triumphant parade. It was quiet and tinged with a profound sadness. He collapsed, not physically in the room, but internally. His carefully constructed world imploded. The mistress left, disappearing as quickly as she'd arrived in our lives, leaving him with the isolated beach house as a monument to his folly. The divorce was swift, brutal in its efficiency, but clean. There were no protracted battles over assets. With my control over the coastline and the legal leverage it provided, his position was untenable. He lost the house, of course. It became another one of my properties. I never went inside. The thought felt contaminated. Owning the coastline didn't bring me joy, not in the way I might have imagined in my angriest moments. It brought a strange kind of peace, a sense of having righted a fundamental wrong, not through vengeance, but through sheer, undeniable strategic power. The ocean still roared, indifferent to the human dramas playing out on its shores. The sand was still cold underfoot. But now, standing on that beach, looking out at the waves, I didn't feel the sting of betrayal. I felt the solid ground beneath my feet. Ground I owned. Sometimes, the price of victory is everything you thought you wanted, replaced by something you never knew you needed. If you've walked a path like this, where everything you thought was stable dissolved, leaving you to rebuild on entirely new ground, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And please, if you haven't already, subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life. Thank you for being here.